Welcome to Love and Tears. This is not just a story. This is the whisper of a heart that has been sleeping for too long. If you're watching this video, please comment with to let us know you're listening, feeling every line as if it were your own story. I'm 52 years old, and for most of my life, I have lived very carefully, maybe too carefully. I married young, raised 2 children, kept a tidy house, and followed all the rules society expected of a woman. Love for me was steady, predictable, and safe. I never chased passion. I just held on to what I had smiled when the time came, listened more than I spoke, and told myself that stability was happiness. Now I see how wrong I was. I never thought something like this could happen to me. And if you're reading, please don't make the same mistake. It begins on a Friday afternoon in early June, the kind of afternoon where the air is thick with sun heat and nameless memories. I had just finished watering the garden when my phone rang. A text from Lena, my best friend from college. Can Noah stay at your house this weekend? My dad's in the hospital, and I need to drive back to Tallahassee. I stood in the sun, reading the text over and over again. Noah, her son, was 17, almost 18. I remembered him as a little boy, always hiding behind his mother when he came to visit. But he was different now. He was taller than both of us, his voice deep, his eyes serious. Of course, I said yes. Lena had done so much for me over the years. Taking her son for a few days was no big deal. Noah arrived that afternoon, dragging a faded duffel bag and flashing a polite, slightly embarrassed smile. Thanks for letting me stay, Elise. I laughed, waving my hand. I'm not 12 anymore. Just call me Elise. He smiled, and the smile seemed to linger on my face for a beat longer than usual. I tried not to think too much. It was all natural. I cooked spaghetti that night, Noah's favorite it turned out, and after dinner, we watched an action movie. I wasn't really watching, but he sat leaning forward, eyes wide, as if searching for something in each frame. We didn't talk much that night, just the usual stuff. School, post-graduation plans. He said he wasn't sure. Maybe going to trade school, maybe working with his uncle in Colorado. There was a maturity in Noah's voice that surprised me. Not at all like the clueless teenager I'd expected. That night, when I brought a few folded towels out onto the back porch, I found Noah sitting there, looking out at the night sky. Fireflies were flickering in the grass, and the air was filled with the sound of cicadas. Are you okay? I asked, stepping softly beside him. He nodded and was silent for a moment before saying, Sometimes I just wish time would stop. Freeze, do you ever feel that way? I looked at him, the contour of his jaw in the moonlight, the sincerity in his voice. It made me freeze. Yes, I whispered. More than I thought. He turned to look at me. I didn't know if it was the night breeze or the silence that surrounded us. But something had changed. A wordless, unspoken understanding. Then he smiled, stood up, said goodnight, and walked into the house. I stood there alone under the stars for a long time afterward, trying to make sense of the warmth that had crept into my chest. It wasn't attraction. At least I told myself that. Just gratitude, a glimmer of youth, of possibility, of being seen, of really being seen. The next day went smoothly. I made pancakes, and he helped me clean out some old boxes in the garage. No one asked, but he did. We played music as we worked mostly Fleetwood Mac, and I was surprised to hear him sing along knowing the words. I thought young people didn't listen to these songs, I teased. He laughed. Your mom taught you well? I know most of her old playlist. By evening, we were both tired and sweaty, so I suggested we go to the backyard pool to relax. I hadn't swum in a long time. I was wearing a one-piece swimsuit I'd left in a drawer for years, and I suddenly felt self-conscious about my body in it. When I stepped out, Noah was in the water, eyes closed, floating quietly. He looked so peaceful. Get in, he said, without opening his eyes. The water was warm from the sun. We joked around a bit, then talked about unimportant things. Then he looked at me and said, "You don't smile much." I blinked. Of course. He shook his head. You only pretend. But when you really smile, your whole face lights up. I held my breath for a moment. Then I burst out laughing. But that sentence stayed with me. The way he said it, the way he looked at me, not like my friend's mother, not like a middle-aged woman with a pre-programmed life, but like a person, a real woman. That night after dinner, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Noah's laughter echoing in my mind. I kept feeling his gaze, the way it held me for a few extra seconds, as if it wanted to say something that words couldn't reach, and I began to realize maybe something inside me was waking up. Something I hadn't felt in years. Something that both scared me and excited me. But at the time, I didn't know how far it would go, or how it would change me. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't even peeked through the trees. The house was as quiet as in a dream. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching the pale sunlight spread across the lawn outside the window. I told myself that I was just tired, that all the strangeness of last night was just a passing fancy, the slight disturbance of a weekend with guests. But then I heard his footsteps on the stairs, barefoot on the wooden floor, slow, heavy, and my heart skipped a beat. It was ridiculous. I was 52. He was barely out of his teens. I had no right to feel this way. And yet when Noah walked into the kitchen, hair disheveled, eyes still sleepy, the sight of him made me smile before I even realized what I was doing. "Good morning," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're up early," I said. "Want some eggs?" He nodded, and we quietly settled into a familiar rhythm. I cooked. He sat nearby, his eyes following my every move, a way that both confused and intrigued me. There was something about the stillness of the moment, the sound of spoons touching pans, the sunlight reflecting off his hair, the pale gold that softened my heart. As I handed him the plate of food, our fingertips touched. A very light, fleeting touch, but enough to make me jump. "Why are you always so calm?" he asked as we ate. I chuckled. "Are you saying you're boring?" "No," he said quickly. "That's not it. I mean, it's comforting. You make this house feel safe." A simple compliment, honest, and it almost melted me. I'd spent so many years being the one who kept everything from falling apart. The one who laughed when he needed to, who suffered when he had to, who hid himself so as not to embarrass anyone. And yet today, someone told me, It made everything feel safe. It was like I was seeing myself for the first time. After breakfast, we didn't make any specific plans. He went out on the porch to read. I did the laundry, trying to ignore the strange drift in my thoughts. By afternoon, the sky had changed. Grey clouds rolled in from the west. Thunder echoed in the distance. Florida summer storms always came unexpectedly silent until they were close. We ended the day in the living room, the light dim, the rain drumming against the window. I lit a few candles in case the power went out, and we sat on opposite ends of the sofa, flipping through an old photo album I'd forgotten about for years. "That's my daughter when she was little," I said, pointing to a picture of her in muddy boots holding a frog. "She looks just like you," he said. "The same eyes. It's stronger than me," I muttered, not sure if it was to him or to myself. Noah turned. "You don't give yourself enough credit." I realized he was sitting very close. The sofa felt cramped. There was something warm and quiet between us, but undeniable. "You remind me of someone I used to know," I said quietly. I didn't know why. "A good person?" he asked. I nodded yes, but it also scares me. The silence stretched. Outside, the thunder rumbled louder. And then he reached out and placed his hand on mine, just a light touch. Not demanding, not imposing, but like a door opening. "You don't have to be scared," he whispered. I held my breath. I could have pulled my hand away, changed the subject, get up to do the dishes, or call Lena. Do whatever was safe, but I didn't do anything. I just sat there, letting the moment last, letting the warmth of his hand sink into my skin like a silent invitation. Eventually, I pulled my hand away. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I stood up and walked into the kitchen under the pretext of making tea. My heart was pounding. My thoughts were a tangled mess. I told myself this had to stop, that nothing was going to happen, that this was just a lonely woman and a nice guy out of sync on a strange weekend. But I could still feel his touch on my hand. Clear warm, not yet gone. That night, I barely slept. Lying in the dark, listening to the rain still falling outside the window, I tried to convince myself that nothing had changed, that the boundaries were still the same, that those feelings were fleeting. But deep down, I knew. Everything had shifted, and I didn't know where it would take me. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of damp earth. I stood barefoot on the porch, a cup of coffee in my hand, watching the thin mist slowly lift from the grass. Everything was strangely quiet, as if the whole house was holding its breath. Min still hadn't come down. I didn't know if I was hopeful or relieved about that. His hand on mine from last night still lingered in my mind. I replayed that moment 100 times throughout the night, each time telling myself that it didn't mean anything, until the very repetition made me understand it did. I heard the familiar footsteps on the stairs. The sound now seemed part of the house. Min stepped out onto the porch, stretching his t-shirt, slightly wrinkled the collar, still damp with dew. He looked more mature than a few days ago. Or maybe I was looking at him with a different eye. "Good morning," he said softly. "Hello," I replied. We stood in silence, listening to the birds chirping after the rain. It was as if nothing had ever happened, but also as if something had happened that could not be taken back. "Are you okay?" Min asked. I hesitated. "I'm not sure." He nodded slightly, as if he understood what I couldn't put into words. After a moment of silence, he said softly, "Yesterday, I didn't mean to embarrass you." "I didn't embarrass you," I answered a little too quickly, then added hastily, "I mean, not exactly." Min looked at me, waiting. I tightened my grip around the porcelain cup. "Maybe you've forgotten what it feels like to be truly noticed. To be seen, not as a mother, a middle-aged woman, but as yourself. And you didn't expect to feel it. From me. I didn't expect it either," he said softly. "But I did feel it. Very real. It would have been easier for Min to laugh it off or say it was just a mistake. But he didn't. He stood there sincere, and it was that sincerity that really moved me. That morning passed in the ordinary shopping, folding clothes, cooking lunch. But amid those everyday things, there was a quiet change, like an invisible string gently pulling us closer together. In the afternoon, we sat together in the living room, watching an independent film he had chosen. The film didn't have many words, just silences and looks. In the middle of the movie, Min placed his hand on mine again, gently and slowly. And this time I didn't pull away. We sat like that for the rest of the movie, saying nothing, just feeling the rhythm of our palms touching. When the end credits rolled, Min turned to me, his eyes searching. "Can I say something?" I nodded. "You're the first person in a long time who's really listened to me. Didn't make me feel like a dumb kid." I swallowed. "I'm not a dumb kid. You know that, right?" "I know. But you're the only one who makes me feel that way." Min's voice was so gentle that I had to look away. I hadn't realized I'd been gently brushing the hair from his forehead. When I did, my hand was there. A reflex. Min leaned in slightly. Enough for me to feel the warm breath. Enough for me to close my eyes. But then I stood up. You need to prepare dinner." My voice trembled slightly. He didn't stop me. He just watched me silently as I walked away. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, my heart pounding. This shouldn't be happening. Tomorrow he would leave. Jiang would return. Everything would go back to the old routine. And yet something inside me was no longer the same as before. That night, when Min offered to wash the dishes, I stood next to him, wiping each plate. Every movement was slow, as if afraid to break something fragile. "Thank you," he said softly when he was done. "For what?" "For this, because you are you." I didn't know what to say. I just reached up to lightly touch his cheek once. In that moment, I realized what I felt was no longer about age or boundaries or any rules. It was about being seen, touched, heard. In a way I had long forgotten. That night, I did not try to sleep. I sat alone in the living room, the lights dim, the house quiet, the kind of silence that only comes after midnight. I hugged my pillow, wrapped myself in a blanket, and stared into space. My mind drifted silently, no longer trying to resist, no longer wanting to avoid. I wasn't surprised to hear soft footsteps on the stairs. Min stopped in the doorway. I didn't turn around. I knew it was him. "I can't sleep," he said softly. "Neither can you." He sat down beside me, keeping his distance. I'll leave tomorrow. I know. After a while, he said, I don't want this to be something we'll just pretend never happened. I turned around. But we didn't do anything wrong. Yes, Min replied, looking straight at me. Even though we weren't touching, you could still feel it. Right. I didn't answer, just turned away. But I knew I couldn't deny it. Yes, I could feel it. But that doesn't mean we should continue. I don't need it forever, he said. I just don't want this feeling to be mine alone. You're not alone, I whispered. Outside, the wind began to blow hard. The branches brushed lightly against the window, like the sound of time passing. He reached out his hand this time. I didn't pull back. We just sat there. No words, no expectations. Just two people who had felt lonely in the big world, finding each other as a comfort. I rested my head on his shoulder, not knowing what it meant. But I knew I would remember it forever. The next morning, the sky was clear, the wind cool. We said goodbye without long words. Min's hug was longer than usual, and I didn't let go any sooner. Thank you, he said. For what? Because I saw you. Chang waved from the car, not knowing what had happened, and that was enough. I went back inside the house. Everything seemed quieter than before. In the afternoon, I sat on the porch, a cup of tea in my hand, the warm sun on my cheeks. I let the silence fill me. Maybe nothing happened after that weekend. Maybe it was just a moment, a gentle ray of light in the middle of a quiet life. But maybe it was more than that. I used to think that love only had one form. That after a certain age, my heart would stop beating. But now I understand. No one gets to choose when they wake up. And sometimes it is the unexpected moments that remind us that we are still alive, still able to feel, and still worthy of being seen.